Very much. Hey everyone, thank you very much for coming today, and I am honored to be speaking here at Freiheit. Let me ask you a quick question about the audio. Does it sound okay to you? Because it's sort of feedbacky to me.
Yeah,
we're good? A little tinny? All right, I sound better analog, I guess.
I think just move the mic down a bit.
All right.
That's the other mic.
Is that a little better? Okay, fantastic. So just to give you a little backstory about me and my frame of reference so that you have a sense of who I am and why I'm interested in this topic. My job is web strategist for Stanford University in California. And basically I'm a consultant inside the university. I work on big projects that haven't started yet. I help inform scope, technology choices, and vendor selection for web development, websites, systems, applications, and API design, things of that nature. I'm also a member of our internal Drupal team, and I work on internal IT projects as well. So things that go out to vendors and also internal projects. And a lot of my expertise and focus is on the Drupal content management system. I started as a developer several years ago, and I have been active in the Drupal community from the beginning at Stanford. So open source isn't new, and there are many open source projects that are extremely successful and have in fact succeeded beyond the tipping point and have vanished sort of into the fabric of our technology stack and become invisible to the user. So Apache, Linux, and so forth. But today I'm going to be talking about what's a little bit higher up on the stack of our web systems, and telling the story about how Drupal really was this kind of amazing grassroots story that ended up informing how the central IT office does things on the web at Stanford. So by tipping point, I am, as you may have suspected, referring to Malcolm Gladwell's book, in which he talks about sudden dramatic shifts in human behavior and society, how ideas and practices spread. And Gladwell uses epidemiology and a number of other domains to think about this phenomenon. I was reading The Tipping Point while I was doing my evangelism and building in Drupal at Stanford, and it feel like a very apt frame to think about what was happening. But what happens after something tips? So that's something that that Gladwell doesn't really talk very much about. In his writing, he thinks of something that has either succeeded, it has taken off, or it failed to for some reason because it lacked some of the necessary ingredients that he goes into in detail. But the story does in fact continue, and there's much work to be done after the tipping point, and that's something that we're learning now. So I've mentioned Drupal a couple times already. So what is Drupal? For those of you who aren't familiar, Drupal is an open source content management system, and it's free software that you can download on the web. It is a framework for content modeling and for building applications and websites. And I like to think of Drupal as a tool building tool, because when you download it and you open it up for the first time, it doesn't look like much. It's sort of like this primordial clay that you have to shape to do anything in particular. So this is one of the reasons why people struggle with it early on. But if you make a commitment to it and learn the system, it has a tendency to pay you back over time. It's a scaffolding technology. It makes expensive things cheaper and hard things possible. And the web changes very fast, as we know, and Drupal helps us keep up because there are something on the order of 25,000 Drupal developers around the world, and no matter how small your web team may be, if you plug into a larger community, you will have entree into more cutting-edge technologies faster than you could possibly adopt them on your own in isolation. So Stanford has a very vibrant Drupal community, but so does Drupal. There are these, it's not exactly a concentric ring, it's more of a Venn diagram, I suppose. And these cultures have informed each other. So Drupal has a code of conduct that they have published and put on the web, and it's borrowed heavily from the Ubuntu code of conduct. But it sets a tone for culture, it really sort of affected our experience for the way that Drupal was adopted at Stanford. It helped set the tone such that we recognize that this is a learning community. We check expertise at the door. We just acknowledge that everyone's learning. And as soon as you come to that realization, people can learn a lot faster. And if you want to learn more about Drupal, I would encourage you to go to drupal.org. So this is the official website of record. Here you can read documentation, read case studies, download it, try it, tinker with it. And I encourage everybody to do so. But this is a grassroots story, really. There was no top-down decision to move to Drupal. That's something that I have heard other institutions, bandying, should we move to Drupal or should we stay with what we have? That is definitely not what happened in our case. Drupal started at Stanford in around 2006 with just a handful of people. There was about 4 or 5 of us, developers, builders, and we had to build things on the web expediently and complex things, so that sort of naturally lent itself to working with a system like Drupal, one that could be built out to a particular domain such as ours. And the same listserv that we used at the beginning, when there was just a handful of us, now has 344 members. So that was, for sort of searching this evidence for a tipping point, I think somewhere between 5 and 344 is where that happened. And we chose a lowly technology like an email listserv on purpose, and that proved to be a really important decision. We wanted something that was extremely low barrier to entry, easy to maintain, and everybody has email. So, of these 344, they're not all developers. Maybe there's about a core group of 30. But the other 90% are actually really important. Lurkers on a listserv are very, very valuable to you because some of them are in fact decision makers, and their ability to see that transparency into your world so that they can see what this community of developers is doing, that informs investments that we have made as an institution down the road. So I think that starting with a low barrier to enter technology was a very important step for us. Another interesting figure. So recently we crossed the 900 website barrier. Of that arc that we're looking at, it took us probably 3 to 4 years to get to about 100 websites. And we're a smaller university compared, we're not one of the large schools that has 50,000 students. We've got about 16,000 students and 2,000 professors. So for us to get to 100 websites, we felt like was quite an accomplishment. And actually, I have a version of this presentation from a couple of years ago where it says 100. The inflection point here, we went from 0, or we went from 1 to 100 in about maybe 3 or 4 years. We went from 100 to 900 in like a year and a half. So the difference was we created a centrally hosted, supported, tuned server environment specifically for Drupal, and we have a free self-service tier. So this is called Stanford Sites. There's prior art that we drew from. We didn't invent this ex nihilo. We drew from previous work at Yale. There's a Yale Sites as well. Brown University is doing something similar. And so we're trying to make Drupal, just as Apache and Linux has become invisible to the user, we're trying to make Drupal invisible to the user. We're trying to make it so easy to use that people can go to a web form, request a website. It knows who you are. It knows which groups you're affiliated with. You request a website, you give it a name, you're emailed in about an hour. Here's your website, here's the URL, here's your user one credentials for administration. And so that succeeded, and that's why our number of sites exploded tenfold. And we can talk more about that architecture later. That's like a whole other presentation. And then the other metric here that I'm representing with the 3 Drupal drops is that we have about 3 websites come online every day. So another measure of tipping point is this convergent evolution we saw. So remember, this started grassroots, and Stanford has more than its share of autonomy. So there are not only 7 schools and however many academic departments, but there are hundreds of institutes, centers, research groups. All of them are essentially autonomous in their ability to stand up their own web properties and do essentially what they like. So the fact that we had all of these large units all independently opting for Drupal, this made Drupal into a lingua franca for developers who were previously working alone. And that was one of our major breakthroughs, because it allowed for small units, maybe with 1 developer, to start operating like a large unit because of the power of community. So these events unfolded over time. But there's one notable event that did not. Stanford hired this guy. So this is Ranga Jayaraman. He's the CIO of the Stanford Graduate School of Business. And when Ranga came to Stanford, I noticed an abrupt 180-degree pivot away from proprietary systems and toward open source. And for those of us, open source advocates and developers, working across campus and trying to build this community, this was such a monumental moment, because our GSB, so Graduate School of Business, if you hear me say GSB, the GSB is so visible and it's seen as a thought leader across campus that I think that the fact that Ranga came in and turned the organization towards open source and Drupal specifically, that was something that had this invisible ripple effect across campus in terms of what the other units were deciding, because we all look to our peers, of course. So here we have a visionary leader that took a risk and greatly accelerated things. The business school's move to Drupal was not without bumps in the road, but now they have an effective and powerful development team that includes some of the best people in the business, actually. And they're capable of great things. And one day, when I was speaking with Ranga, he distilled his reasoning for choosing open source down to a single word: mastery. So Ranga values the ability of his development team to truly master the technologies they use. And one can argue that open source is one of the only viable paths to true mastery. And I had never heard such a succinct argument before that summarized how I felt about my own work. It had a number of semi-tongue-tied reasons for why I felt so strongly about open source and what it is that we're doing. But this is really what it was about for me. And so it was interesting to meet somebody at that level who clearly related to the way that I saw technology. Ranga's strategy was to get off the ground quickly. So he had a 2-pronged approach. He built up his own internal team, which is pretty amazing, but he also engaged Acquia. And professional services wrapped around open source software is a very powerful combination. So, so Drupal is, I think, exemplary in its ability to, for you to download what you need and build it yourself, or you can have paid services, or you can have a combination. And that the fact that a professional tier exists was huge for us. And as for Stanford, Acquia is by far, it's not the only vendor we work with. We actually work with a dozen. But Acquia is the red hat of Drupal. So as institutions, we are typically somewhat risk averse, and we're historically hesitant to think of open source as being viable for the enterprise. It sounds risky. Who are these developers? They have weird usernames. They don't sound terribly credible. But Red Hat blazed the path for enterprise support for open source software. And so Acquia represents this model applied to Drupal. And they are, I think, they pose a really great opportunity, especially if you're hesitant about breaking into this realm and you don't already have an internal development team. So you have the flexibility and the power of the system and the support channel. So coming back to the rest of Stanford, there were 3 particular hurdles that I think in retrospect were key milestones for us in having a successful rollout and why Drupal got to the position that it's in. So number 1 is authentication. So integration with the campus single sign-on system is vitally important, whatever you happen to use. So at Stanford, we don't use LDAP and CAS like a lot of our other peers do. We have our own system, WebAuth, which is Apache WebAuth. That was a barrier. Actually, for many vendors, didn't really know how to grapple with this, but this is something that we solved internally. The fact that there was a single developer at Stanford who was curious, and he developed a WebAuth module for Drupal. Because Drupal has this modular architecture, he basically solved it for the whole campus, even though it wasn't his job. And actually his supervisor, I don't think, had any clue of the value of what he had done. But it laid the groundwork for every Drupal site on campus to be able to tie into our single sign-on system. And so removing that barrier to entry of the additional password for faculty member meant that people were much more inclined to participate. It also meant that for the first time, we had a system that allowed for people from Stanford and from outside Stanford to collaborate together in the same space. There was no other web system that had that capability in a distributed way like Drupal did. So the fact that we solved the authentication problem ahead of all the other projects was a big step. Hurdle number 2, building an official theme. So theme here, for those of you who aren't familiar, is the presentation layer, the look and feel of the website. So Drupal is a very powerful tool for content modeling and building things, but how people think about the web tools that you're building lots of times comes down to what it looks like. And there aren't, at the time at least, there weren't any really pretty out-of-the-box solutions for this. The university communications and one of our developers in IT services crafted an official Stanford theme. We called it Stanford Modern several years ago, and that was that was available, that you could download this package, basically take this folder and you drop it into the right place in your Drupal installation, and you check a box, and then everything, your whole site changes all at once, poof, and it looks like a Stanford website with the university identity. That was a major draw for a lot of other people on campus. Now, so there were a bunch of us that enjoyed theming, and we wanted to craft our own, and we actually didn't use that a whole lot, but for those latecomers to the technology, official theme was incredibly important. Hurdle number 3, training. So this is still something that we grapple with and are redefining how we approach training, and it's needed more than ever. But looking back at the things that really accelerated Drupal adoption at Stanford, we had this really amazing director of technology training. Her name is Nancy Bauman, and she really got what we were trying to do early. And she offered dedicated Drupal training in 3 tiers. So there was beginning, intermediate, and advanced tier that staff at Stanford could use their internal training dollars for. So she really opened the doors for lots of people to learn this technology, people that were brand new to break in. So I think that was a really, really important step for us, going from a small, tight community of developers to a really broad community. So that's how when we went from a dozen people to hundreds. And each of these three hurdles was cleared by a different group at the university. I mean, there was no coordination, really. This wasn't part of some grand scheme. Although if you were to craft a grand scheme, I would probably want to include those. So if you would like to make a top-down decision, I think planning for those earlier would help you. But here it was organic growth. But the entire university realized the benefits from each of those groups, the work of those individuals. By having this common platform, this increasingly common platform, any advance that we would make in any one area rippled out to the rest of the university, which only accelerated things. So our central IT organization, through all of this, they were involved in various ways in some projects. There was a staff member in our documentation design group who built a Drupal installer and updater, and that was the predecessor for Stanford sites. But our central IT organization listened, waited, and acted decisively. And I would really like to credit our CIO, Bill Klebsch, for his responsiveness to what the community needs, instead of trying to come up with his own grand vision and then offering services that then people have to adapt to. He really thinks of the units on campus as partners, and he wants to listen to what they need. So this thing started out as grassroots, and it clearly was emergent. And then they, at the right moment, they decided that it was time to invest. And that's when Stanford Web Services was created, so in 2011. So as web strategists, a lot of my work is, as I mentioned earlier, involved on the early side, the planning phase and vendor selection phase for work that goes out. I like to think of this as building vendor partnerships, because I really am looking for this select group of the best agencies in the business to be working with when something is too big or too custom, or we need it faster than we can handle on our own. And a big part of the reason why Stanford Web Services was founded comes down to we were hemorrhaging money for web development, and we wanted to recoup some of that and build up our own credible service inside the university. But I don't think of insourcing and outsourcing as a binary choice. So I've been working to build a complementary model. So working with outsourced projects to help them be more consonant with our local best practices. So this is very hard to do because, again, the autonomy component, each of these groups on campus has the ability to hire whoever they like and ask for whatever they want. And because I'm involved in an early stage, I get to build in a feedback loop where they understand our vision for the technology as a campus, and it makes it much more likely for us to be able to leverage that outsourced work again and again instead of having it be a one-off application. So in terms of return on investment, I'd like to tell you a little story about a project that I was involved with for our Dean of Research. So the office of the Vice Provost and Dean of Research is this rather weighty office at our university, as it probably is at yours. And they were embarking on an ambitious web project that was taking two separate websites from the merged organization that had this rather horrible information architecture that had just built up over the years, combining them together and re-architecting the whole thing. And it had a number of applications built into that. Among them was a policy document. So they were looking for building a web-based canonical policy document module for Drupal. And but they wouldn't have asked for that. they would have asked for a website. So if we can intervene early when we're procuring things to say, we want a website, but we also are interested in all those components, what we're able to realize is if you hear me refer to a feature, this is something very specific in Drupal. So a policy document feature that we were able to reuse. So the component of this website was called the Research Policy Handbook, or RPH. It's this rather important thing that governs the lives of hundreds of people at Stanford. And it had this really well-structured data model that was very easy to implement in Drupal. Well, there was a bunch of tricky things in there too. But because we asked for that as a discrete feature, it turns out, well, there's another policy document at Stanford that's equally important. It's the administrative guide, and it governs everything that's not related to policy. So it so happened that they were also asking for a new website. So what we had is all of the work for the information architecture, the user experience, the design, and the data model from this one project. We were with, well, one of the things that we learned is it seems like you can almost never just take something and drop it in somewhere else. There's always some generalization that we have to work through. That's a fantasy that I think that we like to entertain sometimes. But, and because that original shop was very assiduous with their project management methodology, we knew the cost of that thing. So we basically had this software project. It cost, that component cost $25,000. So instead of building it once and having the only group at Stanford benefit be the Dean of Research, we built it. It was built for us with consultation with us, and then we put it in a central repository. We use GitHub, and we make all of these available to everyone. So if anything that I talk about you're interested in, you can actually have it. We also have a feature server, which is public. And we were able to reuse it for the administrative guide. And we improved it in the process. So what ends up happening is that these large web development projects that go out and have all sorts of complex things happening in application building, the components go into repositories and they go on the shelf. We describe them with metadata, and we are able to consider them for future reuse. So we built the admin guide using that same feature. Well, it turns out we have lots more policy handbooks than that. So come to find out, there's a graduate studies handbook. And as soon as they knew that this thing existed that we made, the procurement office was interested in it because they have a policy handbook. And so this story is, just imagine that multiplied. We are creating features for fellowship applications. And so because Drupal is this tool building tool that should be tailored for your business model and your business logic and your domain, it's going to be different. It's going to be built differently for higher education than it is for government or business or media. So this technology is use case driven. All this configuration is bound up and should be mirrored by use case. We all share the same use cases in higher education largely. So what we're doing is we're sharing all of this publicly, and we're going to be building up this library of resources over time and making them available to the public. We have also put out a call to our peer universities, and many others are following suit. So I think this is something that is sort of the next chapter for Drupal development in higher education. And if anybody wants details about how to participate in that, I'd be happy to share them with you. So this all sounds great, but it's not easy. And I heard Richard Stallman speak once, and he reminded the audience that free software requires effort from its users. And that's just part of the deal. Mastery is not cheap, and it doesn't come easy, and it takes time. But open source for the enterprise can seem risky, but Fundamentally, it comes down to whether you believe in your staff, whether you're committed to their growth and challenging them. I hope you are. I, for one, believe that we should invest in our people and give them opportunities to innovate and excel. We are technologists. We need to understand and shape the technologies that we use, or they will shape us. And I just totally borked my presentation. There we go. And just had one concluding thought. But yeah, so that's essentially the story of Drupal at Stanford, how it went from grassroots to a central operation, and it's continuing to grow. The next step for us is essentially using Drupal as a substrate for connecting to APIs, and it's becoming the nexus of our API strategy and our mobile strategy. And Drupal 8 is posing a lot of really interesting possibilities for us in that area. So this is only going to continue to grow. In DrupalCon Portland, we announced the existence of an unconsortium. We call it that because individuals are members, not institutions. And the idea is for us to be sharing these features with each other. In a room of 100 Drupalers in higher education, we asked them how many of them were using the features module and building this way, and almost all the hands went up. So we asked ourselves the question, why on earth are we not sharing these with each other? So we're starting to. We created an organization for pulling together projects from GitHub and labeling them using taxonomy, using social tools like voting and metadata, so that the best ones will rise to the top. And I think that this is going to be a transformative change for the way that we work with Drupal and higher ed. So I encourage any of you that are interested in participating or have a Drupal team at your institution that might be interested in participating, we are looking for colleagues. And I hope you join us. Thank you very much. So I guess Q&A makes sense?
Q&A, yes.
Okay, great. So let's see. Is my Drupal used as a general open web platform or as a CMS to control common look and feel, or both? Yeah, definitely both. It is because it became this common platform. By building a Drupal theme, you create this this look and feel package that can be played out across the entire campus. So it does come down to templating and university identity and a way of controlling that. Stanford is one of those places where you really can't compel anyone to do anything. There is no stick. We can only have big, juicy carrots. So we have built a base theme, a Drupal base theme, and a series of sub-themes tailored to make a really attractive option that that ties into the university identity, so that these websites look more like Stanford. And CMS to control common, blah, 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 blah. But I think the real power of Drupal, so first of all, I think that we have really just started to scratch the surface of what it can do. You know, like I said, it's a content strategist who loves a system like Drupal. And it can be used to stage content for all of your distribution channels, from social media to mobile to web. So it's not just a web technology. Like I said, we are going to be using it as a core part of our API strategy for pulling together services from the cloud and from internal data sources, because that's something that Drupal can do well. I think I kind of answered question 2, so I guess last in, first out. What are some features in Drupal that set it apart? There are lots of other great open source systems out there. And in terms of like sheer number of installs and ease of use, I could see why someone might be a fan of WordPress. But I think as soon as you can hit a level of threshold of complexity where you will have wished that you had started in Drupal in the first place. And knowing the clients that we work with, there is always going to be something else that they ask for. So in terms of flexibility and robustness, I don't think that there is a match for Drupal anywhere. But if you just wanted a blogging platform, then actually might opt for something else. Other features that set it apart. I mean, we could compare it with proprietary systems, but I think I made the case for open source and why it matters to us so much. Does anybody have any particular systems that they want to talk about, or something that you're comparing or thinking about? Okay. Yeah. So this is I think both of those can be longer conversations.
Any questions from the audience?
You mentioned that you could use the one to the people when you create stuff. So how much control do you have to install modules?
No. Yeah. And then we're actually talking now about obfuscating user one. Yeah. Okay. So the question was, we were talking about the Stanford Sites platform and the fact that the person requesting the website gets emailed user one privileges. So actually, I think now in the current version, now that I think about it, we obscure user one, and their SUNET account, their Stanford account, has administrative privileges, but not user one privileges. So the Stanford Sites platform is similar to like a Drupal Gardens kind of environment. It's a site building environment, not really a development environment. There's no FTP access, there's no SSH access. The only access that the user has is through the admin UI. So all that complexity of the Drupal system is gone. And it's just this web application that they get to go to and figure out how to use. And we're trying to make it easier and easier. That's one of the paths that we're pursuing.
Do you have groups on campus that would like to deviate off the standard and run
Sure.
on your instance or your service, or maybe even pay the web development team to build something in Drupal, but that doesn't follow the standard templates, and how do you do it?
Oh, for sure. So the question was, are there groups on campus that want to deviate from the standard platform and have custom design and development? Yes, absolutely. I mean, that's the world that we inherited, right? So that's absolutely an option. This is only one of our web platforms. There's also a generalized web environment that runs on AFS, and you can run anything you want on it. It's just that large, complex, database-hungry applications like it don't tend to run very speedily on that kind of environment. And also the long-term cost of ownership for a Drupal site can be a little high if that unit is not staffed appropriately. So there's a saying in Drupal that the drop, meaning Drupal, the drop is always moving. And so there's constant security updates and things of that nature. So groups that want to go it on their own quickly realize that they may not be interested in paying the long-term cost of that. So for the Stanford Sites environment, code maintenance disappears in the background, and it's free in perpetuity. So that's a pretty nice carrot for them.
Maybe we'll develop a custom site for them.
So if it's super custom, then that will probably go out to a vendor. And then they can host it where they like, VM, the general hosting environment, but not on Stanford Sites. So if Stanford Sites is a very carefully controlled set of modules, we are open to suggestion from the community, but we add to it very judiciously.
You talked about or went to a couple of modules that have become popular within your Drupal environment.
Yep.
Can you tell us about some of the others that are most popular?
Sure. Let's see. I think Views comes to mind immediately because Views is on 70% of all Drupal sites in the world and is now in core, actually. So Views is basically a visual MySQL builder. So it allows non-programmers to do programmer-like things with their website. And it has a number of other modules integrate with it. So Views is one of those really strong contenders for most important modules of all time. There's a bunch. So we have about 76 in our stack, and I can show them all to you if you like. The feeds module is pretty handy. It's basically a parser. So if you can point to XML, JSON, structured data, then this parser can pull that information into your site and populate your database. So we use that for a number of things, including calendaring and news. So we have a centralized news service that publishes RSS feeds, and we have a centralized university calendar that publishes like iCal feeds. And so Drupal modules were built for both of those that understand the data model and then parse them properly and map them to your site. So you start up your Drupal site, course parsing. We also use it for course parsing. So we pull information straight from the registrar's office. So if you have a departmental website in Drupal, you have your news parser, events parser, and course parser. And then you have all that information that's flowing into your site just by you essentially turning it on. So those are pretty big.
How do you deal with the expectations involved in having something like sort of more for your internal server or your public server for modules? I mean that by, one thing that really works by being the discovery process of many websites is the developer saying something like, oh, there's a module for that, that's really easy. And so you're setting up these expectations, I think this is really great, so this model is not definitely true. How do you have those expectations and make people realize that this is hard, this is a lot of work, and it's not just going to do a one-to-one fix from your expectations and your problem to this module, which is sometimes a whole one-shot solution.
Yeah, I think, so the question was, how do we manage expectations from users and clients that the features and the modules that we're creating are going to solve all of their problems and be a silver bullet that's going to work right out of the box, et cetera. Is that essentially it?
Yeah, far better said.
We do this by tone setting. The bar that we're setting for features-based development is really low. We're intentionally embracing release early, release often, whether or not it's stable. And we let everybody know that. There's a disclaimer on our feature server that says that, because we want other people to be posting their features too, right? Not just our core team. And actually that started to happen. So one of the other interesting things that happened recently was that the School of Earth Sciences web team, they created their own, so they learned this practice from us. They started creating their own features, and then they put those on our feature server. And then we just sort of like figured out that happened after the fact. I mean, that was amazing. So, but we need to set the bar low for entry so that other people can join us. We can't just be producing perfectly minted, stable, 1.0 releases all the time, or we're never going to have, the library will have 2 things in it. But in terms of managing expectations, we have to be super upfront about all that. The other way we do it is, by offering services. So if a unit on campus is engaging Stanford Web Services, we make sure that it's awesome before we're done. But we haven't really run into a situation where somebody has taken us to task about a feature that we released and they're not doing what they wanted. But I do take your point.
Zach, we can find your credentials easily at the Stanford?
Yep, and also on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn?
Yeah. Okay.
Zach, I'd like to thank you very much for the presentation and telling us more about Drupal and development in that platform. Lots of interesting stuff. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Thank you all.